everyone, Amanda of Rocore Studio here with another video tutorial. So today I will be showing you how to do a simple mold for a medallion. So I'll go ahead and start off by telling you what you will need today. So some of the supplies I am using are the Sculptex non-sulfur clay. This clay is really soft and it is great for making mold walls. Some people use Legos, that is fine too, whatever works best for you. I just found that this stuff is really easy to bend to a more custom shape so that I use a little bit less silicone, a little bit less waste on the sides. You will also need a silicone of your choice. For this one I am using a series called Mold Star 15 Slow. It has a 50-minute pot life and a 4-hour cure time, and it does not require you to have a vacuum chamber, meaning it does not need to be vacuumed and have the air bubbles removed prior to pouring, because this has a little bit of a lower viscosity, or it is a little bit thinner than some of the other silicones you might use where you have to use a vacuum to degas or remove all the bubbles from the silicone prior to pouring. Another good brand to use is Umu. This is another type of silicone from Smooth On that also does not require a degassing. I really like it for beginners. It's actually primarily what I use. I just wanted to try out this new Mold Star just to give it a go. What I like about the Umu over the Mold Star, from what I have learned in this video, is that the Umu is easier to tell when it's mixed because the parts are either, I think it's blue and pink or teal and a darker blue. So when you mix them together, you can really tell, you know, once all the swirls are out. This is a teal with a almost semi-clear part A. So you just want to make extra sure that you're mixing thoroughly to make sure that that silicone is mixed properly so that it will cure. So right now I'm just putting up the mold walls here using the Sculptex clay. This is actually what I sculpted the medallion in itself. I really like to sculpt in it. It's a really nice soft clay. It smooths easily and you can get it to hold some detail. Of course, the drawback is also how soft it is. It's very easy to accidentally mush something and have to fix it. So it's very important that if you decide to try this out, to be pretty careful when you're molding, because I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally hit my sculpture while I'm trying to put up the mold walls, and then I have to stop and touch that up and then go back to doing what I was doing. Whatever clay you decide to sculpt your medallion in, or epoxy or Sculpey is also fine. If you're using a non-hardening clay like this, you want to make sure it is sulfur free. That is because sulfur will actually prevent the silicone from curing, and it is actually apparently very sensitive to this, because I actually used some tools sculpting this horse that I also used on a sculpture that I am sculpting in sulfur-based clay, and there are actually areas of the silicone mold that I discovered at the end that did not cure properly. So I will have to make an additional mold after this. But that is part of the learning process, because you couldn't even see that there was sulfur clay on there, but you could definitely see in the mold where it didn't quite cure all the way. It's a little tacky. So I was able to get a couple castings out of it, and then I will clean those up and make another mold. So it's another process. It's a little bit of a waste of money, but that's just what happens when you learn. So I'm going to go ahead and I just make sure that I have a good seal around the inside and the outside of the clay, and then I'll trim off any excess. You want to make sure when you're putting up these clay walls, I like to leave at least a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch around the entire sculpture. That just helps give the mold a little bit of strength, and it will be less likely to tear, because over time as you cast, it will tear and start to degrade, and so that just kind of helps it last a little bit longer. It makes it a little bit sturdier too. And that was the one thing, I haven't tested this Mold Star yet before, so I'm intrigued to see the difference between this and the Umu. I have found there are two different types of the Umu silicone. One is a faster cure and one's a slower cure. I found that the one that cures slower actually winds up being a little bit stronger. So if you're going to try that, I believe that is the Umu 30. It's the one that's purple. I really recommend that one. I love that one for most medallions. I just wanted to give this one a go. Anyway, so I'm just going to finish up cleaning up these walls. And then we will go ahead and take a look from an above view. Alright guys, and here you can see what our finished mold wall looks like. Give it a good spin around so you can kind of see the border around how much space I left. And of course you also want to make sure that the wall height does cover your sculpture fully. It gives some little extra space at the top as well for any overpour, because you don't want a silicone mess. It is incredibly hard to clean up. But we'll go ahead and move right on. Alright guys, so we are ready to mix up our mold. So I sped this one up a little bit just for time, but I will just go ahead and let you guys know the rest of the supplies that I'm using, since I went on a silicone mold tangent and completely forgot. So in addition to the silicone, you will also need some reusable cups of various sizes and some stirring sticks. You are also going to want to wear gloves and a mask, and preferably eye protection, because it's impossible to get off of countertops, so I would hate to get it in your eye. And we'll start off by stirring both of these really thoroughly separately. You want to make sure that each part of the silicone itself is mixed really well with itself, so that we don't have any weird things happen during the curing process. Now when it comes to calculating the amount of silicone you will need for a mold, it's kind of a learning process. It's hard to explain. I'm sure there's methods and math that you can use to determine roughly how much silicone you would need. I am bad at both of those. I've just learned to kind of by now with a medallion I can kind of eyeball guesstimate how much I will need. I love these little trial kits of the silicone for small medallion molds, because they are almost always the perfect amount for one mold. So that's about what I wound up using. I think there was maybe 1/8 of each container left. So what I did was I mixed it up really well, and then we'll go ahead and pour them in their separate containers and make sure that they are the same exact level. Now there are certain silicones that are measured by weight. This one is actually measured by volume though, so I did, I think, a little over, I think it was 10 ounces of each of them into the individual cups. And then I gave them a quick stir again just to make sure we thoroughly mixed both parts. And then you can go ahead and you can start mixing those together. I try my best to keep it as clean as possible, because silicone is super sticky. It gets all over absolutely everything, no matter how careful you are. So give that a good stir. And you can see the colors of this one, like I was saying earlier. It's like, it turns into like a pale teal once it's done. And you can see that the part A is much thinner than the part B. Or maybe I had that backwards. The teal is much thicker than the other one. So now we'll go ahead and pour this into those containers. And you want to scrape the sides really well. Try to get as much of the silicone out of that first container and into the second container as possible. Now this silicone has a 50-minute pot life, meaning you have, well, you supposedly have 50 minutes to mix it up before it will start setting. But I have found that sometimes it winds up being a little bit less than that, so try and keep it pretty short. You definitely don't need 50 minutes to mix this. I think maybe I mixed this for a good 3 or 4 minutes, just, you know, scraping the sides, scraping the bottom, making sure I got everything around the edges mixed really well. Basically what the pour life is it's the time to mix and the time to actually pour the mold itself. So I try and mix it, you know, you want to mix it thoroughly, but you don't want to take forever. So I, you know, probably say 3 or 4 minutes is generally pretty much good enough. And then you can tell once it's all mixed. And then from there, we will go ahead and pour our mold. All right, so when I start pouring the mold, you want to start in one of the lower corners, preferably on like the bare background like I did here. I usually start low because I have terrible aim and I usually wind up getting silicone everywhere. And then what you'll do is, I actually have this on the floor but on a rotating cake plate just to make it a little bit easier for me. And I will start the pour low, and then I will stand up and actually hold the silicone pretty high, almost to my head level, maybe a little bit over. Basically what that does is when you pour it in a thin stream like this from way up high, it eliminates some of the bubbles that are bound to be in your silicone. Even though this doesn't require degassing, it still will get bubbles in it. And you just want to pour this at a pretty slow but steady pace. You can see I kind of moved around to the front and I filled in that nostril because sometimes those nostrils are weird divots kind of scooped out like that will catch an air bubble. So I wanted to make sure that I got that filled in with silicone. And then for the most part, you want to stay in one area or in 2 areas. As you see, I kind of stayed along the bottom in the corners and let the silicone slowly go over your sculpture. You don't want to, at least with soft sculptures, you don't want to pour really heavily or you will get air bubbles trapped absolutely everywhere, especially in areas like the mane like this. And it's okay, you can see I bent down to kind of just thump the cake plate a little bit just to get out any air that might have been built up in there. And then I will stand up again and continue pouring until this is all covered. Now with epoxies, epoxy clay, or if you sculpted your medallion in something that hardens fully, you can also, to help eliminate eliminate bubbles, you can do a brush layer. So basically what you would do with that is before you start the pour, I will actually pour a little glob directly onto the sculpture, and then using a really soft, just crap brush, because you're going to have to throw it away afterwards, you can actually brush on a layer over the entire sculpture and really, you know, kind of stipple it in there and get into all the main crevices and stuff with your brush and ensure that you're getting a good thick layer on your silicone. And then once it's done being poured, you will just let it set for however long it needs to set. This one sat for, it said 4 hours. I think it wound up being closer to 5.5 or 6, just because it was a little bit colder in my house. And you can tell it firmed up really nicely. So I'm going to start peeling the mold walls away here. This is always a satisfying part. And what's nice about this Sculptex clay is now that the silicone is cured, you can just set that wall off to the side and reuse it. Magical. I have a big bin full of, you know, bits and pieces of the Sculptex that you can just use for later. Recycling is always awesome. It's also recommended if you're doing probably a harder sided sculpture and not a soft sculpture like this one, is to spray some sort of mold release. Smooth On has a mold release brand that's good for, you know, their silicones and stuff that you spray all over the sculpture, the hard sculpture before you pour the mold, and that just helps it release a little bit easier. Because this was an oil-based clay, I mean, it's got kind of release built into it, so I really didn't have a problem. I don't always use a mold release. You want to if you can, because sometimes it can damage the mold if you do not. But for the soft sculptures like this, I found that you don't necessarily need to do. Oh no! You don't need to put that mold release on, at least when you're pouring. You do want to put some sort of release when you're casting, just to make the mold last a little bit longer. And then, as you can see, I pulled her out and dismantled her, and then I went ahead and started pulling out the last little fiddly bits of the mane that stuck in, because this is such a soft clay. You might have to go in with some tools and stuff, and what I did with some tweezers and pull out any excess. But other than that, your mold should be ready to go for some castings. I usually give it, after I pour it, overnight to cure fully, so it's, you know, its maximum strength. And then from there, you should be good to go. Of course, this was the part when I found out that there were a few areas on this mold, even though it mostly cured and it looks beautiful. I wish I could use it. There were a few areas in there that unfortunately had contact with the sulfur clay, and it actually, it basically just makes the silicone it's gummy there for some reason, and so that would not work out well. So I wound up having to redo this, but here it is. Ta-da! I hope that was helpful. If you had any questions or anything, feel free to message me, and of course, thank you for being a member of my Patreon. Until next time.